Half a day, the Committee on Health, Tourism, Historic Preservation, Land and Justice is calling this virtual public hearing to order. It is 9 a.m. on Tuesday, October 6, 2020. I will be conducting this public hearing as the Vice Chair of the Committee on Health, Tourism, Historic Preservation, Land and Justice. Notice of this morning's virtual hearing was provided via email to senators, stakeholders, and the local media on September 29th for the 5-day notice and October 4th for the 48-hour notice, thus meeting the requirements of open government law. I'd like to acknowledge my colleague, Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano, for joining me here today. The purpose of this virtual public hearing is to receive testimony on Bill number 314-35 COR, sponsored by myself, Sabina Perez, Speaker Tina Rose Mooney Barnes, and Senator Clinton Rigel. It's an act to amend section 34.10 and 34.30, 34.40, and 34.50, all of chapter 34, title 9, Guam Code annotated, relative to prevention and prosecution of wildfires as a threat to persons, property, and the environment. The committee will continue to receive written testimony until 4 p.m. on October 12, 2020. Please address testimony to Senator Sabina Perez, Vice Chairperson, Committee on Health, Tourism, Historic Preservation, Land and Justice, and can be dropped off at the mailboxes here at the legislature. Or emailed to office@senatorperez.org. Rules of conduct for this virtual public hearing. The host of this hearing will mute all participants until called upon by the chair. Virtual backgrounds should not be utilized during this hearing, and participants' face must be visible at all times. When called to speak, please remember to unmute yourself. Members of the committee wishing to speak may indicate their desire through the in-app chat feature. The order of questioning would be in the order of request. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by the chair before speaking. Please remember to state your name for record-keeping purposes. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to character or motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. And any violations of this general rule of conduct will result in removal from public hearing by host. I would like to acknowledge also Senator Will Castro, who has joined us here today. Thank you, Senator.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. And now we will begin our agenda. Bill number 314-35 COR, sponsored by Sabina Perez, Speaker Tina Rose Mooney Barnes, Senator Rigel. An act to amend section 34.10, 34.30, 34.40, 34.50, all of chapter 34, Title 9 Guam Code annotated, relative to the prevention and prosecution of wildfires as a threat to persons, property, and the environment. So now to begin an introduction. So first of all, I would like to thank Chairperson Terlahi for hosting this virtual hearing, or for having me host this public hearing today. Bill 314-35 seeks to add burning of, quote, forest land as a prohibited action under Guam's arson statute. By adding this language to our statutes, Bill 314-35 will help address increasingly serious wildfires we are experiencing in Guam. This will help preserve our fragile environment as well as protect the lives, homes, businesses, and property of the people of Guam. I would like to thank my co-sponsors, Speaker Mooney Barnes and Senator Rigel, for their support on this important measure. At the beginning of this year, we witnessed shocking photos and videos of wildfires that tore through Australia and lay unprecedented destruction to the continent's fragile and cherished ecosystem. In the past 2 months, the world's attention has turned to the US West Coast as deadly fires spread with explosive forests destroying neighborhoods and forcing tens of thousands to evacuate at-risk areas. The scale and ferocity of these blazes devastated entire communities and destroyed millions of acres. They take lives, they cost millions in damage, and cause immeasurable damage to the fragile ecosystems. Most fires can be traced to careless human actions and in some cases, purposeful actions of arson. Compounding the problem, scientists and community leaders inform us that the larger, deadlier fires are a predictable consequence of the world's growing climate change emergency. Arson has always been a potentially deadly form of crime, but due to the climate change, our lands are more arid and the potential danger of arson is greater. So while these examples serve as a deadly wake-up call for the world, we are witnessing similar threats here at home In recent decades, wildfires in Guam burned an average of 3.5% of our island, and the number is growing. According to the Department of Agriculture and the Pacific Fire Exchange, 468 wildfires burned 4.7% of our island in 2018, and this constitutes 6,251 acres, including 290 acres of native forest in just 1 year. In 2019, the number increased further to 7% of our island burned by wildfires. Wildfires in Guam are rarely started due to natural causes such as lightning. According to the Guam Department of Agriculture Pacific Fire Exchange, most wildfires are set by people, and usually by unethical hunters who use arson as a tool to frighten and corral their prey. Unfortunately, our current laws do not adequately address this type of arson that leads to most wildfires. Bill 314-35 will outlaw the reckless burning of forest land, defined as any brush, covered land, cut over land, forests, grasslands, jungle, or woods. By including forest lands in the arson statute, the measure will allow the AG's office to better prosecute the arsonist poachers. The state of California has adopted similar language, which would enable them to better enforce arson laws against those who intentionally set wildfires. And these uncontrolled fires threaten native and endangered species, expose areas to nuisance plant invasions, which further increase future fire risk. They threaten our marine ecosystem and fishing way of life because unchecked blazes destroy plants and environmental features that prevent erosion, and the resulting runoff flows into Guam's waterways and into our seas, harming Guam's fragile coral reefs and fish stocks. Bill 314-35 strengthens our laws by clearly outlawing the burning of forest land and holding arsonists accountable for their reckless actions. We must take a strong stance in order to protect our environment, our lands, and our waters. So at this time, I would like to call upon those that have joined us here today to provide testimony. So I would like to go in order of those who are listed on the chat group. Or maybe I could just go by order of who I see. So, or maybe the agency. So I'd like to give the floor to Director Chelsea Breck. And if you can unmute yourself, if I can remind you to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, half a day, Senator Perez, Senator Marsh-Titano, Senator Castro, and to everyone else here. Thank you for allowing the Department of Agriculture to provide testimony on this extremely critical issue. And I'd like to thank Mr. Regis and Ms. Attorney General, Assistant Attorney General Jessica Toft also for assisting with this. I know that they were really critical in providing support and research for help with this legislation. And of course, to our acting division chief, Christine Farron, for leading the way with the agency on this charge, and for also being really proactive in bringing the wildland fire arson investigations to our agency and other agencies as well, to help provide support for this testimony or this bill once it becomes public law. So I will begin reading our testimony right now. Half-a-day Senator Perez and committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on Bill 314-35. Bill 314-35 complements Guam's Forest Action Plan, which describes wildfires as a top threat to our forests and natural resources. Approximately 4.8% of total land area is burned annually in Guam. That's over 6,000 acres each year. The bill provides wildfire investigators and law enforcement with the necessary language to appropriately charge individuals suspected of arson, negligent burning, and criminal mischief. The Department of Agriculture understands the intent of Bill 314-35 and fully supports the proposed amendments. The proposed bill amendments are consistent with the division's mission to conserve, protect, and enhance Guam's vegetative environment and sustain natural resources which are dependent on healthy forests. If you have any questions regarding this testimony or require further information, please do not hesitate to contact me or Christine Camacho Ferrin, Acting Forestry Chief. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Chelsea. So I'd like to actually recognize Edwin Regis. I know he was instrumental in kind of organizing this effort. So I'd like to recognize Edwin Regis for his testimony. If you could please unmute yourself before.
Buenas, Senator Perez, Senator Taitano, Senator Castro. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this public hearing. Again, my name is Edwin Regis, and I'm the administrator for the Guam Coastal Management Program. As you know, GCMP is responsible for the land and natural resource planning function of the Bureau of Stats and Plans, in which we work towards the common stewardship and the vibrant stewardship of our coastal resources. Part of our focus is looking at effective enforcement of natural resource related laws. And so what you see before you is a joint effort between the legislature, the Attorney General's office, our Office for Coastal Management Program, our Department of Agriculture, and other agencies such as the Soil and Water Conservation District to really provide a solid change that is needed to manage our resources. So back in 2018, we had come up with the priority focus for our intern program with the University of Hawaii, in which culminated in a draft being produced in August of 2019. Under the supervision of Jessica Toft, the Assistant Attorney General, she was able to produce a draft legislation in which we presented to various partners in addition to this legislative body. And I really want to commend the body and the sponsor of this legislation for really taking bold steps in making changes that are necessary to protect our resources. As you may know, and as we all know, that fires are destructive, but if you really think about some of the devastation that they cause in terms of numbers, I think certainly it'll even be much more shocking. This bill represents an opportunity to take a stance to prevent real potential threat to personal life, which it certainly is vulnerable when these fires are set. But also thinking about the sunk costs for the efforts that are put into the current forestry efforts that are undertaken by our wonderful partner agency in the Department of Agriculture. We have estimates from the Army Corps of Engineers that puts it about $75,000 to reforest an acre of land in our upper watersheds. So if you think about how much of that land is burnt after a reforestation effort is put in place, it's just really frustrating to hear. So I've been in meetings where we have we celebrated the success of putting in 3 acres of a forested area, and then the next year 2 of those 3 acres are burnt. So if you think about that cost of $75,000 per acre, that's what is it, 450,000 if my math is correct. So it really turns out that that 1 acre that survived that initial burning period, that initial burn, has the cost of a magnitude of 3 times than the actual value that was put into it. So if we are really wanting to make a difference in making sure that our efforts are sustainable as we reforest our area, and that we're really making smart decisions to invest in our watersheds, we have to really take care of this problem of burning. When you have that ratio of 3 acre burn to 1 that manages to survive, you know, that's really 1 acre per year, and you're looking at a 100-year work plan. So definitely the current model, if you're just looking at the figures and the economics, it's not going to work unless we really manage this burning problem. And so I hope that this committee really takes in all the different data and looks at all the considerations, and then acts boldly in this and moves it forward, because I think it is a resounding agreement among the government agencies and those who are actually on the ground that this would improve the current conditions that we are faced, and will certainly improve our chances of meeting our mandates, which is working towards a sustainable future. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Edwin, for that testimony. Definitely sheds a lot of light and the urgency of addressing this. Thank you. So I would like to recognize Christine Verheeren, of the Forestry Division of Department of Agriculture.
Thank you, Manana everyone. The only thing I want to add to this is that, just as our director stated, we are in full support, and it's been long coming. Between the investigation trainings that we've implemented this past year, the extremely aggressive outreach campaigns that we've been pushing within the community and among Department of Education and our partners, it's just this natural transition to law that can be enforceable, the law that we can charge, and to actually hold people accountable for their actions. And one of my favorite parts about this is that we also include that negligent and mischief burning, because not all of our fires are arson. You know, they're not the intentional malicious intent. Many of them are the accidental escaped backyard fires, and individuals, families, and landowners need to be held accountable for that as well. And a strong warning system with something enforceable at the end with teeth will really help us protect our resources and community. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Christine. Yes, I've known you're such a hard worker when it comes to this, and I know you put a lot of effort in reforesting down south, and I know it's sad to see it burned like the next year, and with all the effort and all the school kids going down. So yeah, we need to find other ways to solve this issue, and this is one step. Okay, thank you. I'd like to recognize the chairman of the Southern Water District, Angie Mendiola. She would like to provide testimony.
I'm sorry, Senator Sabina, we're going to have our district director, Erica Pangilinan, present our chairman, Mike Agun's testimony.
Okay, thank you so much, Auntie Angie.
Erica is on.
Okay, yeah, I see Erica. So yes, I would like to recognize Erica Pangilinan from the Southern Soil and Water Conservation District.
Hi, Hafidi. I'm so sorry my power just went out. I guess because all of the rain. So I'm so sorry if it kind of lags. But Hafidi, Vice Chair Sabina Flores Perez, and members of the Committee on Health, Tourism, Historic Preservation, Land and Justice, 35th Guam Legislature. My name is Erica Pangilinan, and I am the District Administrator with the Southern Guam Soil Water Conservation District, representing on behalf of the Chairman, Michael Uggan, and my board. Thank you, Auntie Angie, for that. We appreciate the opportunity to submit comments and testimony in support of Bill 314-35 relative to the prevention and prosecution of wildfires as a threat to persons, property, and the environment. As part of our mandate, the Southern District engages in various partnerships with entities such as the University of Guam, the Guam Department of Agriculture, Guam Environmental Protection Agency, and the United States Department of Agriculture and more to promote the conservation of Guam soil and water resources. The Southern District has prioritized the restoration of southern watersheds to prevent soil erosion and flooding, which are the high key items down in the south, as mentioned earlier. We've partnered with UOG's Guam Restoration of Watersheds Initiative, which aims to restore badlands and reduce sediment runoff into Guam's coral reefs using innovative technologies such as drones. To complement our efforts, we also work with the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Wildlife Services, to control and eradicate feral swine, as the invasive species too contributes to soil erosion and the destruction and contamination of our soil and water. We also work closely with our federal counterpart, USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, to promote better stewardship amongst our agricultural producers through locally led conservation and best management practices. The Southern District with the Northern Districts are currently developing its 5-year long-range plan to address Guam's top priority resource concerns, including soil and water quality. We recognize that even after all of our work and that of all the work of our partners, especially our partners, wildfires continue to threaten and impede our soil and water conservation efforts. We've repeatedly seen millions of dollars and thousands of hours invested into restoration ruined with just one brush of a wildfire. So therefore, we believe Bill 314-35 will deter and prevent wildfires, and by doing so, we can in fact protect our people, our properties, and our environment. Individuals who also commit arson must be held accountable and used as an example of the consequences of such negligence. So we would like to thank you again, Senator Perez, Senator Rigel, Speaker Munya Barnes, and all the senators who support this bill for introducing this much needed legislation for Guam. I now like to turn the floor over, or the screen over, to my Vice Chairwoman, Angelita Mendiola, to close it out.
Yes, thank you, Erica, for that testimony and for highlighting all the work that you guys have been doing throughout the years in the background. And but you've been consistently, Southern Soil and Water and Northern Soil and Water have been consistently working to address the environmental issues that are really impacting the communities. And Southern Guam is a different terrain, and it's more susceptible to the fires and impacts of fires. So I thank you for all the work that you're doing. So I believe, Auntie Angie, would you like to add some of your thoughts to the testimony that's been provided by Erica?
Yes, 2 sentences to summarize our Southern Soil Water Conservation District testimony. Yes, our board fully support Bill 314-35, and I personally support. Thank you for all your effort, Senator Sabina. You have engaged yourself, your service to our district during our education symposium, and I want to thank you for that. And so your heart is with protecting our environment. I just want to read just 2 sentences, 2 long sentences. To ignore the protection of our forest land is to ignore ourselves as people, thus ignoring our livelihood and the livelihood of all the future generation on Guam. And I'm gonna just end this up. I'd like to request that all of you that are really interested in our environment to watch the film on Netflix called Kiss the Ground. It's called Kiss the Ground on Netflix. And that will really increase your appetite to protect our natural environment. Our district and all our partners, both on the federal and the local side, we have invested a lot of time, a lot of labor, resources to reforest our badlands, only to be destroyed by fires and also with the feral swine. And we continue to do that. And up to this time, we're trying to get to the highest point of our Ugam watershed to reforest the highest point. I forgot mountain something. But anyway, we're still having problem with it's a real challenge. The Department of Agriculture, Forestry, EPA, NRCS, and other partners, and even our service learning students. We've been trying to get to the highest point, and we're having problem because of challenges, the dangers on the deep terrain, the rough terrain, the cliffs, and as well as just getting all the our seedlings that the children collected, the seeds that have them collect native tree seedlings. We took them to the agriculture. The children planted. They're ready to be put on the ground, but we have problem even getting all our seedlings up to the mountain. So really, this bill will really address so that we don't have to keep reforesting. It's very challenging. So this bill will really address that, and hopefully it will take care of all the destruction that negligent people are doing to destroy our livelihood by burning purposely, especially. So again, I would like you all to watch the Netflix film called Kiss the Ground. And I'm sure it will pass the legislature with flying colors. Thank you. Have a good day, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Angie Mediola, for those words. And yeah, I think we definitely need more of your presence in the, and that was, yeah, very, very good words to listen by. And I feel that, you know, we really need the community to come on board and stop this, you know, burning, because the power lies within us, right? All right, so thank you. Now I'd like to recognize Bob Govenda. Bob Govenda used to, I believe, work for the NRCS a while back, but it's great to have you here after, I believe, I haven't seen you in almost like a decade. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Bob Govenda. I'm just offering support for the bill as a private citizen and a resident of Maritza for the past 20 years. I spent 23 years as a soil scientist for the USDA NRCS, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And from 2000 into 2015, I was the regional soil scientist for NRCS, handling all of Micronesia and American Samoa. So I've seen a bit out here. My background is I have a bachelor's degree in anthropology and archaeology from Washington State University, a master's degree in soils from Washington State, and a PhD in soils from University of Hawaii, Manoa. Right, and so I'd like to present some of the soils perspective of the wildfires problem. There's been a long history. When I say long, I mean about 4,000 years of people burning the landscapes out here. And I've provided the committee with a paper from archaeologist Stephen Athens and his colleagues from Honolulu that have done a number of studies in CNMI and Guam and Palau on fossil pollen. And so they've looked at pollen and charcoal remains that collect in swamp areas and have seen that starting around 4,000 years ago, there's definitely an increase in the amount of charcoal where people have been burning. And also the pollen from trees decreases steadily, and disturbance species such as grass and ferns, those pollen increase also. So it's a very interesting article and provides background, and Athens has several papers like that in publication. An overview of this problem is also, when I was with NRCS, we produced a brochure called Guam, an Island on Fire, and I've provided that to the committee also as a general background, be useful to hand out in certain situations or posted online. What I really want to get to, though, is the actual soils. And in southern Guam, there's mostly volcanic soils. There's some areas especially on the east coast, soils from limestone. But it's the volcanic soils. There's two main varieties out there. One is about 4 to 12 inches of topsoil over soft rock. That particular variety is susceptible to erosion, and you have very little soil there to begin with, and any kind of erosion resulting from any kind of land disturbance, especially fire, can be really damage that soil. But chemically, those soils are pretty good, and they're relatively fertile and good for reforestation. The other kind of soil has a thin topsoil, generally about 4 inches, sometimes as much as 6 inches. And that's where all the soil nutrients are located. And when you get below that, you get into a red subsoil. That's how when you stand at any vantage point looking over the south, and you'll see areas of gray that have those real shallow soils, just topsoil over rock. And then you'll see the areas with red. It's the red soils that are the real challenge. As soon as that topsoil is gone and you get into the red soil, you have uncontrollable erosion. The problem is that there's very little fertility in the subsoil. Plant nutrients are very scarce. And if that's not bad enough, it also has toxic levels of soluble aluminum, which is toxic to plants. And of course, a lot of people have looked at that here on Guam too, about even potentially being toxic to humans. and some of the problems, health problems they've had in pneumatic over the decades or centuries even. Those red soils, the aluminum is not, it's not something from the war or anything else. These are just natural weathering products. And the soils are just basically chemical systems, and they have positive charges and negative charges. And that's how they hold on to fertilizer and release fertilizer. And so the aluminum has a very strong affinity to holding on to the soil, and it slowly gets released, just thermodynamics, and gets released in the solution. It stunts root growth, and then it makes it difficult to pull up plants to pull up water and pull up nutrients. So it's bad here in Guam. About 50% of what we call the soil exchange capacity, that is the capacity to hold on to nutrients, about 50% of that capacity is taken up by aluminum. When you get to Yap, it's like 75%. When you get down to Palau, it's over 90%. So it's bad as it is here, it's way worse down south. So anything that will disturb that 4 inches of topsoil, whether it's fire, because the swordgrass is basically a bunch grass, and there's a lot of bare ground in between plants. And so when it gets burned off, then there's a lot of bare ground that's open to erosion. Again, you only have 4 inches separating from a reasonably healthy ecosystem to a disaster zone. Because once you get you lose the topsoil and you're into that red subsoil, you can't revegetate it. The Navy has spent many hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to revegetate areas. It's very difficult, as we've already heard 2 people mention here. And basically, it'll just keep eroding, and it'll erode all, 20, 30, 40 inches. Some places, 6 feet of soil is gone because you can't stop the erosion. Even throwing a lot of money at it, it's very difficult to stop it. So the best solution is prevention. And so preventing the forest fires, because anything, off-roading vehicles that tear up that 4 inches in no time, even cows or carabao, because they're herd animals and they follow each other around, they create trails, and they break through the soil, and eventually that topsoil disappears on their trails. Trails don't revegetate, and then they just are conduits for water and erosion. So anything that disturbs the soil, but especially fire, which is very widespread. There's a lot of emphasis, not just here, but in Palau and elsewhere, Yap, CNMI, planting trees. Trees mostly aren't going to really stop the erosion unless you have a really, really thick cover and a natural ecosystem. There's in Hawaii, they used to grow macadamia nuts. The cover was so dense that it shaded out all the undergrowth, and they had more erosion underneath the macadamia trees than they had if it was just bare ground out in the open, because the raindrops falling off the macadamia leaves. Some of the later work that I was associated with the Navy, with Robert Wescombe, who was their environmental officer at the time. They went to trying to restabilize areas with grass, and they've had some success with that. And that survives the fires a little bit better, it would bounce back a little bit. So that's basically it. And I've provided a PowerPoint presentation that I developed. It's called Degradation of Volcanic Soils in Micronesia. That's been provided to the committee. And it goes into the chemistry. There's speaker notes on each slide where I've tried not to use jargon. It's all in layman's terms that describe what the situation is. Again, it's a bit of chemistry, but hopefully it's easily understandable. But that's something that a lot of people don't realize, that it's the chemistry down here in the volcanic soils is a real problem. And you can't see the chemistry. All you can see is that red dirt. But the red stuff is nasty. Some of the nastiest stuff. Out there, some of the most challenging soils I've ever worked with which would make working in Micronesia very interesting. Wow. The only other thing I'd like to say about the bill is that what caught my attention right off the bat was about forest lands. And most of the fires are started in grasslands. And so I would suggest, if when this goes to newspaper articles or online or whatever, they're going to see forest lands. And some of the people who are starting the fires are going to say, oh, well, I don't set forests on fire, I just set the grass on fire. And so I know it's clarified in the bill itself, but if it gets in the newspapers, it's going to get, I think, overlooked that it really is targeting grasslands also. Anyway, that's the extent of my presentation. Again, if you check out the resources I've sent to the committee, you'll be better informed about that. I appreciate the opportunity to add some input.
Thank you so much, Mr. Govenda. Yes, and I guess people don't realize, the general public doesn't necessarily realize the fragility of the southern soils. And in fact, I think soils in Guam in general are very, it's a thin layer. Even in the north, you have thin layers of soil that needs to be protected just as much. But I think with the fires in the south, that definitely is one of the big impacts to the southern soils. And I think some of the work that you've done along with other scientists in characterizing Guam soil, I mean, it's very interesting to see how diverse our soils are here on island. And I do encourage everybody to appreciate, to connect with the different types of soils. So yeah, did you want, we'll definitely have that presentation. We're trying to get it up on the chat for everybody, and we'll definitely distribute that information to the public and to my colleagues. But thank you for that suggestion. Okay, so is there anybody else that would like to testify? So I don't think, yeah, having seen no one, we'll go on to the line of questions. So just some of the feedback that I've been getting from the public is that, to increase the severity, let's say, for higher levels of, I guess, punishment. What is your take on that? Is it, do you think that it should be done with this bill to increase, I know it's third-degree felony, but what are your thoughts about increasing that to anybody on the panel that would like to address it? Maybe starting with Director Breck. And if you can unmute yourself too.
Today, thank you, Senator. Again, my name is Chelsea Breck, Director of the Department of Agriculture. Recently, the deputy and I had a really great opportunity to trek by foot into one of the areas most frequently burned, the Babula area in Talafofo. We did this with our conservation officers, and it was a very rigorous trek, but it was completely worthwhile. And it was also really heartbreaking how much red exposed barren soil that we saw when we walked in through there. So my response to this would be, yes, I agree that we should increase the penalties for the arson specifically. What the conservation officers pointed out that I was not aware of at all is that most of the arson that is set is directly tied to the meth problem on island. And it's because, I don't know if I can go too much into it, but it's because the people who are there to poach burn so that the deer will be attracted to the area. They set up stands so that, there's even monitorable evidence that this is what's happening. And when they've been encountered by our conservation officers, they've been directly linked to the drug trade. And the reason they catch the deer is to sell the meat to get money to buy drugs. And that was the only reason that they were doing it. It wasn't to feed their families. It wasn't to even save anything for themselves. So in creating stiffer penalties, you're doing so not just for the reduction or the deterrence for arson, but also for engaging in illicit drug activities. Interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's, I was not aware, but thank you for that information. Is there anybody else in the panel have any comments about increasing the penalties in regards to setting wildfires? Okay.
I'll provide just some comments on that. Again, my name is Edwin Regis, Administrator for the Guam Coastal Management Program. And I think what the bill represents is that a really good approach to researching what has been done nationwide. So it certainly is precedence that we draw the level of punishment from. In my own kind of personal opinion, I think maybe even adding restorative justice elements to this would be due. But I think I'll just kind of end it with that. Thank you, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Edwin. And maybe if you can send information regarding that, and I'll, my office can definitely work with you in finding out best practices when it comes to restorative justice. All right. So, any other comments?
Senator Perez?
Hi, Vice Chair Angie.
Yes, my name is Angelita Mendola from the Southern Guam Soil Water Conservation District, and you are seeking comments or input for punishment for what?
Increasing penalties.
Increasing penalty. I think it would be good to add in service penalty. You burn the trees, the forest, maybe you can have them join our group, the different groups that are reforesting, to maybe come there themselves, carry all the supplies and the plants up the hill, so they can realize the efforts that all the conservationists are doing. So maybe some kind of community service add on to whatever other penalty is due, so they can see firsthand, which is what we do with our children at home. They do something, they correct their action by doing service to make them learn. And maybe have an education outreach to island-wide that Christina has been trying to do for so long, Christina Fehiran from Forestry, Department of Agriculture. So maybe some kind of community service so they can have a first-hand experience of what different entities, government entities, both federal and local, have to go through to get up to the highest peak of Ugam watershed, so we can improve our water quality and all that. But maybe some kind of, I don't know how to do that, but just a suggestion, community service add on to whatever other penalty is due. Thank you.
Angelita Mediola. Yes, Chelsea, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I wanted to agree with what Mr. Regis and Ms. Mendola both stated. When I was out there with the conservation officers, I said the same thing to them, that if we could, to have whoever's caught or any of the offenders come out there to pick up all the trash that they leave, as well as to help reforest the area. I think that would be great restorative justice for to make up for some of the things that they've been doing to the island, because it's not only the burning, but they leave a tremendous amount of trash behind as well.
All right, thank you, Chelsea. Yes, Christine.
It's a great idea. And to show that it does work, the Manel Gaius watershed projects that we have ongoing, the earlier years through BSP, Guam Coastal Management Program, the Coral programs, there was funding which had stipend workers coming in. These stipend workers were selected from the villages. So Yamatic, Maritzo, and Arahan, that were going to be directly impacted by the restoration works, the reforestation work up in the watershed. So my point being, these individuals were, this is their second, third, fourth chance within their communities to do something better. And they were selected by their mayors. And when they came out to these sites, many of them, they admitted to, I used to poach, I used to do this, and having them out at the sites doing the maintenance This is the prep work for all the plantings that were done over the years at Menalgeus. And so they did the fire break work, the maintenance and prep, and having them out there putting their sweat and muscle into that work. They walked away as some of the first people that call us during fires in that area. They call because they're like, we work so hard out there. We get it now. And so we really do create and foster these new stewards in this unlikely group. And it's so rewarding. So there's definitely a plus there.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to Senator Kelly Marsh-Taitano, if you have any questions for the panel here.
Hazardous Masi, Chairwoman. You know, it's been so important to listen to everybody's testimony, and I really appreciate everybody sharing that. It's very enlightening. I learned several things myself, and I hope the community at large understands these elements so that they just feel armed with information and can get on board. It's important to hear about the reforesting, the conservation elements, how fragile our soil is. I hadn't understood quite how fragile it was until this hearing, and just what a cycle it is for badlands. I did think it was easier for badlands to be rehabilitated, and so that is something that the entire community really needs to understand. And I'm hoping, and maybe there have been efforts like this in the past, for those that are hunting because of tradition or sustainability, you know, in feeding their family, those connections to the fact that they are actually destroying some of the diversity of the forest, which then impacts the animals that live in the forest, the health and well-being of all of us, but it also impacts their very own fishing, the health of the reefs and the fish in those areas. So there may have been connections there, but you know, to continue to connect that for them so that they understand they're kind of shooting themselves in their own foot, if you will. But hearing about the meth connection is something new to me, and reaching them will probably have to be different. And it helps us tailor some of that education. I really do support the ideas of community service that are the restorative justice kind, that where they are out there contributing to restoration and understand what it takes to try to restore the damage done in just a second, the widespread damage. And I'd really like to see an education program. I don't know if here for driving under the influence, there are those programs that you have to go to some sort of course, but I think really we can't make them care, but we can at least ensure that they understand some of these connections. And so education and awareness are perhaps the best ways to get to do that, that maybe we can tie this to some sort of having to go through some sort of education program and have to test out of it or something, so that at least they have the information, even if we weren't able to fully make them care deeply about it. But with that, I do have several questions, or at least a few, sorry. And I did also appreciate the comment about grasslands. It's true, if we hear forest, we may have a disconnect between what we're doing in the grasslands. So that was very important to hear as well. So, sorry, with the questions that I have, some of the concern that I've had over the years is understanding where this is. It seems that we're having grass fires all over the island, way up north, in some central areas, and then way down south. Is this an accurate picture? Are we seeing more forest fires in some of these areas that we haven't in the past? And is it affecting urban neighborhoods or neighborhoods as we continue to sprawl out? Is that kind of a an additional element to worry about. Yes, if Christine could speak to that.
So it's a great question. Thank you. Now, regarding whether or not our new areas are becoming at risk from wildfire, that's always a potential. Now, as we have more and more development, areas that have burned regularly, this is where I think the first big risk is going to come in. Cross Island Road is a great example. Private properties abutting the government, the conservation lands. These lands have burned annually for decades. Surveying tape goes up every year. So eventually we're going to have communities moving in, and that means we're going to have to plan for these new families, these new housing areas that are going to be built right in the middle of frequently burned lands. So that's going to be one of our first issues to deal with. As far as our historical fire mapping has indicated, I have a map that I would love to share, but it doesn't have a legend on it, which gives ownership of where it came from. It's through the U.S. Forest Service, Department of our Guam Agriculture. But this map maps out, at least from 2015 to current, where all of our fires have been occurring. And you will see a definite overlap. There is a link, and I should have had that handy. I'll try and search for it in a minute. But there's a link that takes you to the virtual mapping that we've been doing. Okay. So you can pull up Guam, and from 2015 to 20, break down each individual year, and you can see the fire overlay. And you can click on the different parcels to get size and acreage. So I'll look for that link, and I'll send that to this chat shortly, if you don't mind.
Yes, that would be very helpful. And it's good to know that it's available to anybody who wants to click on it to be able to understand some of this. Some of the numbers I remember when I was researching some elements in this, it seems like, and correct my numbers if they're wrong, but that we have anywhere from maybe 300 to 700 fires set a year. Are they all human produced in one manner or another?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. All of our wildfires on Guam are human-caused ignitions, as the Forest Service would say. And it's, as far as lightning strikes goes, it's highly unlikely, but we do not say that's impossible. It's just, it hasn't been documented. But of the fires that we've investigated this past season, they were human-caused ignitions.
Yeah, and I think that really provides the emphasis for the need for this bill. I'm so appreciative of Senator Sabina in thinking of this need for our community. It's so important for the overall health and well-being for us in so many ways, as been discussed, and that she's been so thorough, that she reached out to the AG's office and the Department of Agriculture and everybody who's here to work with them all along the way and make sure that it's as comprehensive an approach as possible. I have one other question. Did you want me to wait and come back to me, Chairwoman? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, please continue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I can provide insight for your last question.
Oh,
sorry.
yes, please. Yes, please.
You had your question was it was touching upon land use and how fires would affect development. I think that's a very important question, especially now that as we're starting to gather more spatial data on the threats of fire. And so when you look at the decision points and how permitting is applied, there is a policy that's approved in the government of Guam. It's called the Hazardous Area Policy. And it says that development shall be limited to not pose unreasonable risk for these type of different hazards. So it mentions fires and erosion. So if the continual push to increase permitting enforcement based on this new knowledge, that could definitely have a real effect in terms of how these building permits are going to be issued in these areas, because we have to, by statute, take into consideration these hazardous areas.
So just Masi for sharing that. And with any bill that we have that we're potentially making into law, I think it's important for people to have as much stakeholdership as possible to understand. You know, some people may be more in tune with understanding or caring about the environment, and others are more in tuned and deeply invested in fishing rights. But this can really hit people, it seems like, from what you're saying, in their pocketbooks, the value of their land, the resaleability of their land, the development of their land. This arson is potentially affecting that. It's affecting our ability to grow and develop in certain ways. And that's gonna hit people, I think, is in how they can utilize their land and sell their land and develop their land. So thank you very much for pointing that out. So the last question that I had is just to provide further clarification. It seemed to me when I was doing a little bit of research that this is so necessary because it hasn't been real clear that the grassland areas and some of these undeveloped areas can be penalized in this way. Like arson, it seemed like it was for developed areas, and then for other areas, it seemed like maybe it just might be a misdemeanor, if at all. If somebody could, maybe Christine or others, or Director Breck could weigh in on that.
Sorry, I was like, Director, can you weigh in on that one?
All right, go ahead, Christine. I was trying to find my unmute button there. I'm sorry, Senator. I was responding to one of our personnel asking a question. Could you repeat that question for me?
Oh, sure, no problem. And so we've had really good discussion about the intent and the value of updating this definition of what constitutes arson. It seems to me that in the past, it's really just been about the developed environment, buildings, structures, developed areas. And it seems to me it's been kind of hazy or less clear about grassland areas and other areas that aren't developed, or if there is anything in those areas, it seems to be just a misdemeanor if it's pursued at all. And if you could weigh in and clarify that for me.
I believe that it has very much to do with, the original intent of whenever it was first established with regard to arson, it was consideration for the burning of private structures and private property, more so than just our open natural resource areas. I think this is us just catching up. And I found that when I first joined the agency, and Christina and I have had this conversation many times, I think it's all about the language that we use. And I say this to my kids every day, that words matter and the words you choose matter. So we can't put a soft touch on it and say, or Christine's favorite phrase, what is it, the human caused ignition or human ignition fires. I said, you need to call it what it is. It's poachers burning, it's poachers causing arson, and use language that resonates with the public and that will evoke an emotional reaction. But I think it's just us as a community catching up, or helping our law to catch up with what we're seeing. I don't think when the original arson language was written that there was any assumptions that people would be burning wildland to catch poachers or to poach deer and such. And I think it's been part of our disconnect with our natural environment as a community. And it's not something that we can blame on urbanization or anything, but we've just become more consumed with things that take us out of the environment than things that keep us in it. And we're trying to get back to that. And part of that is a little bit of a silver lining that's happening with our lockdown, is that people are eager to get back outside now and eager to reconnect with our natural environment. So we may just see much more of a positive response to all of this legislation too. But thank you for that question, Senator.
Just Mossy. And Christine or Edwin, did you want, or Southern District, if anybody had additional information? Edwin?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And so certainly I agree with the Director Breck that the bill really focused on protecting built environment. But what I think this amendment does is it really speaks to the value of what we think our natural environment and our natural charm is worth. And that's worth fighting for, it's worth protecting. There's price, it's really priceless. So you think of our savanna lands, our mountainous areas, our fragile areas, whether they're forests, mangroves, or reefs. This bill spans across all of that, and it speaks to protecting it. And so if you're looking at evaluating the output of this compared to the initial focus, which is just on the built environment, it's a tremendous step to improve the protection of those resources.
Very well stated, both thus far. And then Christine?
I get excited, my apologies. Edwin, both excellent points. And remember, we are one jungle fire away, one wildfire away before the fire is within your village. It burns, you know, we have all these fires, and that forest edge decreases, it declines, and your village is the very next one in line. And so these fires needed the recognition that by being inserted into this bill the way it was, it emphasizes the importance that wildfire that's occurring less than a mile away from your home, less than a quarter mile away from your home, is going to be a reason why 911 calls are increasing. The smoke hazards, Edwin and I, we've had great conversations about, you know, smoke studies, and but that smoke hazard, that's the number one reason why 911 gets called. It's other than you, Senator Titano, with a fire coming right up against your back walls, the next and top call is because people are having breathing problems. And what made this so significant at this time right now is that we have the COVID, we have the pandemic, and it's attacking respiratory systems, and people, it just increases the threat. So that's just, again, tying in that this wildfire is not a fire disconnected from you. It is very much connected to you and where you live, and just reminding the community of that.
Just Mossy for that. And oh, yes.
I'm sorry, Senator. I didn't mean to interrupt, but yes, Edwin's comments also evoked and as I said, it just evokes a very strong emotional reaction. I think this exemplifies why we need, I mean, if we could just impose the harshest penalties on this to point out why we want to protect our natural resources. The harsher penalties will illustrate how important we consider these natural resources. And it's not just damage to the soil, damage to the southern area, but it's also ridge to reef. These fires tremendously negatively impact our coral reef infrastructure, which we haven't evaluated our personal coral reefs. I know we've been working on that, but just nationally, they're seen as billion-dollar infrastructure. And that applies here as well. So if we wanted to add a monetary value to it, or just to the reasons behind the harsher and stiffer penalties, it's the damage to the jungle area, it's the loss of biodiversity, it's the loss of endangered species habitat, it's the loss to our soils, the amount of money it's going to cost to reforest the areas repeatedly, and then damage to our essential fish habitat. All of that ties together. And like you, Senator, I've had the fires burning not miles away from my home, but literally feet away, where we were standing in our yard with hoses trying to help battle the fires. So it's not that it will eventually creep up to personal property, it already does.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent points all the way around. And, you were saying, Director Breck, about the power of words, or the need to use accurate or evocative terms. And, I think, unfortunately, it has developed to a situation where when we hear about dry season being upon us, we now refer to it as fire season, a lot of people. And that's, I think that's such a scary thing that it's become that much part of our reality. And what Edwin was saying about the pricelessness, it really is, you know, one of those MasterCard commercials went through my mind. I mean, you know, and I'm not minimizing buildings and stuff. Buildings can be rebuilt and other things can be rebuilt, but an entire set of ecosystems that took thousands of years that cannot really easily be rebuilt, and all the costs really, and governmental money costs. Every time we send rescue units out there, I'm sure that it costs thousands, if not tens of thousands, like per, you know, major fire, and we're endangering the lives of those firefighters. We saw that some of them had to go to the hospital and get treated this time around. So, I mean, the cost is just exponential in a lot of ways. So thank you all for that enlightening information. That's so important for all of us to hear. And Satuas Balasi, Madam Chair, for allowing me to ask several questions.
Madam
Yes,
Chair, Sabina, Senator
Yes.
Sabina.
Yes,
I just want to add to Senator Kelly Marsh's question. I just want to say that it doesn't matter if the fire is right behind your wall or you're 10 miles away, it affects everybody. If the fire is in Talafofo, it would affect the quality of water and the coral reef. So Guam is small. So even if it's in your backyard or 10 miles away, if the fires at Talafofo or in Orangan, it affects the quality of water to Melesu and Umatak. So it just really affects the livelihood of our people, no matter how far or how near the fire is. That's all.
Yes, thank you, Angelita Mendiola, and thank you, Senator Kelly. That was a great dialogue, great discussion, and it really expanded the, I think, the impact of this bill. And also, you know, it ultimately affects every one of us. It's not just whether we're, and you know, when we damage one part of our environment, it affects. We're all connected to that. I do want to share. Mr. Govenda sent a PowerPoint slide, and just to give the public some visuals of the impact to our environment, I just want to share that, put that up on the screen, and Mr. Govenda or anybody in the panel who would like to comment, and you know, so we're going to put it up on the screen right now. So this is the beautiful south part of our island. Where did we go? I lost the visuals. Where did it go? Oh, there. Sorry, I seem to have lost. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
So yeah, we can go to the next slide. So a lot of us are very familiar with this, the Badlands, and you know, this can be prevented. So if anybody wants to add some comments about this. Next slide. Yeah, just to go back and show, you know, soil is, what fire does, it exposes the underlying soils and leads to erosion. And as you can see, the soils are, you know, the top layer is crucial to vegetative growth. Next slide. Yeah, one thing we need to realize is our soils are non-renewable. It takes hundreds, thousands of years for this to develop, and it's definitely beyond our lifetime. And
Senator.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to. This one's worthy of comment. This is up on this. I didn't take this picture. It was somebody else from the office, and it's on Navy land, and it just shows how uncontrollable things get. Once it starts going, you can't stop it. ground in the foreground is just weathered rock, and it's fairly dense, and it's a rooting barrier. The chemistry is not so bad, but the roots just can't penetrate it. And then if you look back farther up the hill, you see the red soil, and then there's the grass growing on top of it. Well, you can't really see the topsoil very much. There's not a lot, maybe there's 4 inches. And the erosion on this landscape is not the foreground where it's already this eroded off. It's the red soil there. That's where you can't revegetate. And that's where the active erosion occurs. And it just keeps working its way uphill, wetting and drying, a little bit of expansion and shrinking, and the soil forms sand size or even fine gravel sized particles, and that just easily washes away. And then the topsoil eventually will get undercut, and it just breaks off and works its way downstream. But this is how these situations develop. Once that red soil is exposed, there's just no stopping it. It just keeps eroding and eroding.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you. Next slide. So this is a cut showing the different layers of soil. I know this is a little bit more technical, but it's important to note that not all of the soil can support vegetative growth, and that's why this topsoil is so vitally important. And it's important to prevent the forest fires, grassland fires. And if we can kind of cut to the last parts of the slide, we can move on to the next one, please. Yeah, this is just more of how sensitive and fragile our soil underneath all that vegetation that you see is. Okay, next slide.
I just like to clarify that the saprolite is the weathered rock. It's just a fancy name for weathered rock.
Of course, there are other challenges to our natural resources, which includes off-roading as well. Okay, next slide. You can just go back maybe towards the end. So this is some of the restoration work that's being done. I don't know if Christine, if you wanted to add anything to this, the work that you guys are doing.
So I'm sorry, couldn't tell if I unmuted. We actually haven't been putting mulch down in big patches, but it's something that we've been talking about. Just need to get more mulch. But it's a great practice. But our efforts right now have been planting acacia trees and underplanting natives, because we're at the point now where the acacias we planted in the Oscoto, the Manel watershed, we now have good coverage, and the grasses have been kept low because of that canopy. So we've been able to underplant natives, and we'll be thinning out the acacias. And in areas where the canopy was more mature, we saw the fires die back at those points. So we need these trees to have a chance to hit preferable height and in diameter to withstand oncoming fire.
Thank you. Next slide, please.
My screen just went black. I don't know if that's just me.
Maybe hit escape. That might I don't know if escape would help.
There we go. Thank you. Can I make a comment on that last slide and this one too about the acacia? And that is they prefer acacia because it's a nitrogen fixer. So the roots get infected with a bacteria, and it can put nitrogen in the soil. So you get free fertilizer. But maybe Christine can help me out on this. I've gone up on Cross Island Road and looked at the plantings up there and dug in, and what you see, if a tree needs to be infected with a bacteria, the roots need to be infected, and they have the nodules that form on the roots. And if you break the nodules open and they're green inside, well, they're not working. They're not producing any nitrogen. They have to be pink inside. And I've looked around a bit, and I have not found nodules, much less pink nodules. So, Christine, are you aware of, are these trees actually putting nitrogen in the soil? Have you seen the nodules and broken them open?
You're right with the undergrowth, the new sprouts coming up after fires, because that's where you'll see it. You know when fire hit an area in the conservation area because you have this diverse stand, multi-age, and then all of a sudden you have this thick patch of acacia saplings, and yeah, you're right. When we pull those up, we're not seeing those nodules. When JB Friday from Hawaii, UH Manoa was out here, we were pulling samples and we weren't seeing that. So that's something JB was running some fertilizer sample or studies with another member of our team under stewardship. So we're really interested in seeing what comes out of that. But I'm sure he reaches out to you, Bob, whenever he's here. So more to discuss, more to look into this. But remember, the goal here wasn't for us to have an acacia forest. The goal was to have a native forest. And so thinning out those younger acacia, that's going to be a huge effort because we've had more fires and we have less personnel. So forestry, we need people. We need people to be able to keep up with this workload because we're managing thousands of acres, and we're going to keep on battling both fire and sustaining healthy forests.
I'd like to emphasize something Kristen said about understory, because if you just plant trees, they've had experience in Palau. They had acacia. They planted, I don't know how many acres, many acres of acacia. And the idea was that the acacia would grow, they'd fix nitrogen, they'd be adding nitrogen in the soil, the leaves would fall off, more nitrogen would go in the soil, you'd build up a topsoil, and everything would be wonderful. And the only thing in that happened was the trees sort of grew, and then the leaves fell off, and then they washed away. And there was no nitrogen, there was no fixing the soil. In fact, there was a lot of gulling without stabilizing the ground surface with grass or some other kind of species underneath the trees. It'll just keep eroding.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please.
This is the place I'm talking about in Palau. And they planted all these acacia trees, and you can see the leaves in the gullies there washing off, and they're not fixing any nitrogen. The pH has to be high enough for the bacteria to survive. And I'm not sure exactly about the bacteria, but I've read about a pH of 6. Well, a lot of the soils in southern Guam, the volcanic stuff, is lower than pH. So it may be too acid for the bacteria.
Thank you. Next slide, please. We're almost done. So, yeah, so this is this poster is I think it shows pretty much how grass fires can lead to downward effects. So I don't know, Christine, if you want to share.
This was actually created before I jumped on the team, and it's a great reference. Bob, you had probably more development, and maybe Bart Lawrence when he was here with USDA and RCS. But this was one of the first pieces that I picked up in my reference library when I started, and I recommend everybody read that.
Yeah, Bart and I worked on this with the consultants, and we provided them the information about the brochure, and then with the poster also, but the artistic stuff was the consultant that fixed it up. It's pretty striking. This can be printed out, but it's about a 10-inch or 20-inch by 30-inch size poster.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I think we definitely need to increase awareness about the impacts of fires in our island, and that it's totally preventable. And with this bill, I think it's important that we do prosecute and have penalties for those in order to stop this. But also, I'm looking forward to working with you guys in regards to looking at other approaches. Some of the things that were mentioned is that people are committing these violations because the meth issue has been a longstanding issue in Guam. And, if we can solve both issues at one time, I think that's, probably we can sustain ourselves and solve this issue. And I'm very determined to do that, to look at what are the roots of the problem and address those roots. So thank you to everybody for providing testimony, and we'll definitely get this bill, and we'll definitely, if we have changes, we'll definitely bring it to you for input. So Sidus Masi. I guess this hearing is now has concluded. The time is 10:22, and thank you everyone for your time. Sidus Masi.
Thank you, Senator. It was a great hearing. Thank you, everyone.
Sidus Masi.